Can you sit down in your seat?
Behaviour in the classroom was already high on the government's agenda when Channel 5 broadcast Classroom Chaos earlier this year. Hidden cameras followed a supply teacher. Pupils' faces had to be blurred. The report gave ammunition to those demanding tough action. Soon after, Ruth Kelly set up a working group to recommend solutions which could be applied in all schools.
Boys, can you turn round? Boys, can you turn round and face the front?
In this film, we find out from 5 head teachers about the real state of school behaviour in Britain today. And we look at the different ways they are tackling the problem. At Teddington School in Middlesex, the staff believe behaviour is getting worse.
Well, I've been teaching for 29 years. There has been a significant shift over that period of time, but perhaps more latterly, in the last 5 to 10 years, I think, students are much more challenging in school than they used to be. There seems to be a general lack of respect for people in positions of authority.
That's a view shared by teachers at Southfields Community College in South London.
I think in recent years the levels of behaviour have deteriorated, but not to the level of violent behaviour, but more so low-level disruption in the classrooms. Children who shout out of turn, who get out of their seat and might wander around the classroom, who might start cussing one another, students, and then the teacher has to deal with that, and this could all be happening at the same time.
But how widespread is bad behaviour? Jeff Moss is a former teacher and educational psychologist who now spends all his time in schools training teachers.
In many a class, if we become invisible, what we seem to see, often see, are things that head teachers never see. That's kids jumping on tables, throwing books, shouting abuse at teachers, and sometimes it feels very uncomfortable in those classes. That's probably still a minority of classes, but for those teachers who are experiencing it, it's an awful, stressful experience for them. And for the kids in those classes, there's not a lot of learning taking place.
If behaviour is getting worse, why? Many educationalists and teachers believe the key lies in changes in society and the way in which children now relate to all adults, teachers and parents.
Parents find it difficult to be parents, I think. They don't want to stop them going out, and they want to try and meet them halfway, and whether it can work with some, it doesn't work with others. I think society, the media, influencing them. I mean, for my boys particularly, you know, they're very media aware. They want to be cool, they want to, you know, wear the correct clothes and to be seen to be cool, and it's actually not cool to achieve amongst these boys, really.
The distinction between childhood and adulthood is becoming blurred. What children witness now, not just on the Game Boy and the like, but also the mainstream television, is a world of adults which are very often less than, I suppose, positive models for them. We see the celebrity culture with adults who behave in very immature ways, who are attention-seeking, very egocentric, actually where education isn't much valued, where learning certainly doesn't come to the fore.
Teddington School is running a new project for a group of Year 10 boys with a history of bad behaviour. The man in charge has a no-nonsense approach to poor behaviour.
You're going to start off in the tank first of all, where again you're going to be right off. We're going to be practising some of the skills you've learnt before, okay? Yeah. In an orderly fashion. Yes, you can leave your bags here because it will be locked up. Okay.
Wayne Simon is a sports psychologist. He's running the Self-Esteem Through Sport project. The Teddington boys spend half a day a week learning to row.
Think about what you're doing.
The aim is to change the behaviour of boys who've been in trouble since Year 7.
What sort of bad behaviour were they typically getting up to?
just rude and challenging really to staff at school. Lots of them really not interested in the academic side of school, and because of that, they do have difficulties in the classroom. They can't access all of the work all of the time, and because of that, then there's behavioural problems that are linked to it.
And they're getting lots of detentions and punishments.
Lots of detentions for not handing in homework. Then they don't go to the detention. Then it becomes bigger. It escalates into a department detention. They don't go to that. It becomes a leadership team. And so the whole thing was kind of snowballs, really. And that was happening regularly and often leading to internal exclusions where they sit down the head's corridor and work is sent down there for them for the day.
Right to go right. Yep, that one to go the other way. You're in control, you're the cox, you're the main man. Ross, Zach, remember who's in charge of this boat? Okay, he is, because you can't see where you're going, he's the one who's going to tell you what to do. Generally speaking, most of these young men, the only attachment they feel is to the pack, and that can be quite negative in school and out of school. So what we've tried to do, what we have achieved, is getting them to feel part of a team. The rowing gives them a sense of achievement, it gives them a sense of attachment, and their attitude has to change. A, because they have to behave correctly, they have to follow instructions on the water, and they know that if they don't work together, hence the change of attitude, nothing will work. When they've achieved something, you could see them physically feel better. They stand taller.
I think what the programme does is to allow us to spend more time with individual students, learning more about them, learning more about their needs. So to be off the school site, in a small group, engaging in activities where they have an interest and more particularly they have a talent and they can be successful, that has a positive effect on their whole attitude towards education in general.
Remember, if you put your blades flat on the water, that stops it. Keep it flat. That's good, and nice and flat. Right, and flat, and stop. That's it. Nice and steady. Good. From an early age, we teach our children how to behave properly. We teach them which knife and fork to use. And a lot of people say, when they come into the classroom situation, especially at Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, they should know how to behave. Of course they should do. But if they don't know the basics, we are responsible.
At Nine Styles in Birmingham, they believe a clear, consistent approach to discipline within the school can change the behaviour of students. In the past, many would have been left to drift out of the system.
I think it's far too simple to say behaviour is getting worse. The issue is a much more complex one. We now are trying to address the educational needs of 100% of our students. In the past, we were all quite happy to write off a percentage of our students, perhaps as many 20 or 30% of our students.
Nine Styles' answer is a whole school approach. Behaviour for Learning was introduced by Sir Dexter Hutt, now executive head, and has been praised by many politicians, including the Prime Minister. It's based on a system of consequences, starting with a verbal warning and culminating in a 6-hour stint in the isolation room. Today, there are 5 students, a typical day. Kelly, from Year 9, is a frequent offender, who in the past would have been written off by the school.
It's horrible, just sitting there and boring. You're just working, they give you some work, and they've got these little desks, and you can't see the person next to you, and you just sit there, do some work, and then at dinner time, because breakfast, you don't get breakfast in there, and then when it comes to dinner time, you get to have a sandwich, and then you just get on with some more work, and then go at the end of the day.
The isolation room is a pretty extreme measure. Do you think it's an appropriate measure?
It's an appropriate measure, and I would disagree that it's extreme. It ensures that students stay in school, it ensures that they are continuing to do work, but at the same time it makes them very clear about the consequences of their poor behaviour. And whereas they're normally allowed to be with their friends in lessons and around school, because of their poor behaviour in lessons, they're withdrawn from that lesson for a day where they have to work on their own.
3, 2, and consequences then to the following people. So have you all looking this way, headphones off, thank you. Still waiting for one young man.
Notices spell out the consequences. A C1 is a verbal warning, a C2 a second warning, and a C3 an hour's detention. Another telling off leads to a C4, isolation.
When you first came to the school and you saw the isolation room, what did you think?
I thought that it worked. I certainly went in there and felt that children, there was a mystique about isolation around the school. Children do not want to go there. It's only a minority that ever end up there.
Did you never think, gosh, this is a bit brutal?
No, because I think as a teacher, you're dealing in the classroom, you're hands-on with children. When people 4 chances they've got before they end up in isolation, that's 4 times they've stopped learning. I mean, that is pretty significant in itself as a teacher, and I never felt it was brutal. Just stop there for me, just going to have little bits of it, OK? The system of consequences for me just allows me to teach. What it does is it stops very low-level behaviour. It's those things that drain teachers. When you're trying to talk to a class, stop that, don't do that, please. It just stops that because people know exactly where they stand. Why do children misbehave? I think it could be a combination of factors. They might be bored, it might be too hot, it might be that they're not engaged, that is not relevant to them. It might be, for example, they've had a poor experience at home the night before, they've got problems at home. It might be they've come from a lesson where they haven't had a good time. It may have been a problem in the playground. There could be 101 reasons why children misbehave. I think generally, I have to say, in my own lessons, when it does infrequently happen, it's if I'm perhaps, if I'm honest, not as planned or prepared as I could have been. Right, easy one. Was she using her left hand? Did you hear her using her left hand? You need to listen more carefully. She was using her left hand. It's because you were nodding off there. Right, next time I'm going to give you a consequence.
Although the 9 Styles approach has been widely copied, critics doubt whether on its own it can work for all children.
Until, I suppose, fairly recently, very often many of the traditional approaches to, quote, discipline worked, certainly for most children. It probably still works for a majority of children, actually, but it doesn't work for the vulnerable children. Traditional approaches of telling don't work. Telling isn't teaching. When I'm teaching, I'm getting into an approach where I am very carefully modelling, instructing, supporting that behaviour.
At Drayton School in Banbury, they've introduced a system which they believe is better suited to that vulnerable minority. Restorative justice, known as RJ, doesn't deal in instant punishments or consequences. It's based around a conference in which pupils are encouraged to think about and change their behaviour.